Welcome to Aston Means Business, a podcast from Aston Business School. My name's Steve Dyson, and I'm a journalist who's interviewing some of the UK's top business academics every month here at Aston. Our third podcast is all about how a happy and healthy staff can help businesses and organisations to greater success and higher profits. To explore this, I'll be talking to Wladislaw Rivkin. He's a senior lecturer in the Work and Organisation Department at Aston Business School. He researches how employees and organisations can improve employees' well-being. Hello to you, Vlad.
Hello, Steve. Thanks for having me.
No problems at all. It's a delight to speak to you. There's been a huge increase in awareness of mental health and well-being on the business agenda in recent years, hasn't there?
Yeah, indeed. So if we look at the statistics today, basically, we are talking about around 600,000 employees who suffer from impairments in mental health and well-being, such as, for example, depression, anxiety. We are talking about 12.8 million workdays lost due to mental health. And in a recent survey, around 44% of employees said that work has an impact on their health and well-being, and the impact is negative. So half of the workforce is saying that work has a negative impact on their mental health.
And those figures you gave, those are in the UK?
Exactly, yes.
So 600,000 people have some effect of poor mental health or lower than wanted well-being in the workplace.
So with these 600,000 people, we are actually talking about clinically diagnosed mental health impairments.
So it's not even what they think, it's what the doctor has said.
Exactly. So we are talking about people with major depression, about people who basically can't get out of bed in the morning, about people who have issues with controlling their impulses, or people who are anxious to go to work, like properly anxious.
So what causes this in a nutshell? What causes this unhappiness at work?
Yeah, so the idea is that, as I said before, the world of work has changed tremendously. Whereas I think at the turn of the century we came from a more manufacturing oriented work environment. The work environments in today's world are very strongly service oriented, and the issue with that is that the demands associated with this type of work are different than the demands associated with manufacturing. So before that, the most prevalent work-related health issues were musculoskeletal diseases, so classical back pain. And we still have a lot of people who suffer from back pain at work, but due to the newer demands, the most prevalent causes for work-related ill health have shifted to psychological diseases.
Okay, and that psychological disease, what brings that on? I mean, what causes someone in the service industry to be unhappy?
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that the work demands we look at, we call them emotional labor. So this is one central work demand we look at, and emotional labor reflects a demand where people have to show emotions they don't really experience at work. So for example, if and this also applies to academia, so if we are holding a lecture nowadays, students expect us to be engaging, to elicit positive emotions, and in most cases they don't care whether the lecturer had maybe a conflict with her or his supervisor before, whether there might be family conflicts, whether the lecturer has experienced something recently which may have basically initiated a bad mood.
And I guess, like you say, that transfers into the area of restaurants and bars and health services. We as the public, we almost expect a cheerful nurse or a cheerful barman or a waiter who's got a smile on his face, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean you can see it especially around Christmas. I think if you experience any service, you expect the delivery of the service to express certain emotions. But we're also talking about professions where you may have to be serious or considerate. So, for example, as a policeman, you need to express certain emotions. You can't be cheerful and give someone a fine for something, or even in the hospital professions, you can't be cheerful and tell somebody that he or she has cancer. So we are talking about both spectrums of emotions, so showing positive and negative emotions. And the issue with emotional labor is actually that if we are in the mood, or if we genuinely feel the emotion which is required at work, then it's not an issue to show the emotion. We just authentically show the emotion we have. The issue with emotional labor, however, is if we don't experience the emotion. So, for example, we are in a sad mood but need to be cheery, or we are in a cheery mood but need to be sad. And this is what we call emotional dissonance. So the conflict between genuinely experienced emotions and actually needed or expressed emotions. And this is what causes impaired health and well-being. So I think, of course, there always have been service industries, but I think in the last 10 years, service has become the predominant driving factor of the economy. Whereas manufacturing, due to reduced labor costs, went into other countries, and this is what caused also the increase in impaired health and well-being. And on top of that, there is another major demand which we refer to as self-control demands. And the idea of self-control demands is that in their work, people need to control impulses. So this also applies to some degree to non-service professions. However, where you have to basically consider words you're saying or put up a certain appearance, resisting distractions. So all of us are getting quite a lot of emails every day, and trying to ignore them while working on specific tasks, and especially in that direction, it's not only emails, it's social media, Twitter, Facebook, maybe your children calling during the workday. So trying not to resist distractions but focus on work. And the final self-control demand is overcoming inner resistances, so having to engage in tasks which are inherently not pleasant. So, for example, in today's clinical or in today's health occupations, nurses have to do a lot of documentation, which they may not have done in earlier times. And I imagine that somebody who decides to become a nurse expects to deal a lot more with patients than with documentations, and therefore doing the documentation is a thing they need to overcome the inner resistance to do. The issue with emotional labor and self-control demands is that these demands pile up during the day. So imagine you start your day in the morning by preparing your children for school, and then your children have arguments, so you try to resolve arguments, and this necessitates self-control. After that, you arrive at work, and then maybe you have to talk with a difficult customer. So to resolve issues of a difficult customer, show certain emotions. Again, you're required to exert self-control. Later in the day, maybe your supervisor asks you to do something you have to do overtime, maybe miss some appointments. Again, you require self-control to resolve this. And by the end of the day, you come home, and then you see the dishes in the kitchen are not washed. And what happens? You argue with your partner. And the idea of self-control is that, or our academic idea of self-control is that different acts of self-control rely on a common resource. So it doesn't matter whether I have to control emotions, or to resist distractions, or to do something I don't like to do. So everything basically drains my regulatory resources, and once this resource is basically drained or depleted, and we call this state ego depletion, people are less able to exert self-control, so they are not good at self-control anymore. And that's, for example, why in hospitals towards the end of the day the attendance or the diligence to wash hands reduces by 40%. Because people don't have the self-control anymore to engage in these tasks.
The tank has been emptied.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with all those causes in mind, and there's multiple causes, and the self-control bank, and all these kind of things going on in people's minds without them even noticing it, but they are at various stages becoming less ready to react, less ready to be happy when they need to be, less.
Exactly.
Basically, they're feeling their well-being is suffering. So
it's draining. Basically, you're talking about resource drain, and at some point you don't have the resources anymore to react, and suddenly you become rude towards a customer who maybe has some claims, and this has quite a drastic impact on work performance as well. Or if you think about hospitals, if nurses don't wash their hands and spread viruses, then obviously this has a negative impact on patient.
What can the average employee do for themselves to help stop this from happening?
Yeah, so we started this research first by looking at the impact of self-control demands over and above other stressors, and what we've shown is that basically self-control demands and emotional labor constitute unique stressors which predict health and well-being. And after that, and this we have done this for the last 8 years, we looked at different resilience factors. So as you asked, what can people do themselves, and what can organizations do to prevent the negative consequences of such demands, especially because in a lot of occupations, self-control demands and emotional labor, they can't be reduced.
No, so just to focus on the person themselves, then the individual, what are things that they can do?
Right. So we have looked, for example, at sleep. So we know that, for example, sleep is quite a strong precursor, or sleep replenishes regulatory resources. So you probably know it from anecdotal experience, where you have a good sleep after maybe feeling drained or depleted the night before, and suddenly in the morning things look differently.
Always looks better, doesn't it?
Exactly, things look better.
Unless you've had a bad sleep.
Unless you have a bad sleep. So in one of our studies, we actually shown that, for example, sleep quality prevents the adverse effects or the negative effects of self-control demands. And even more interesting, we have seen that the beneficial effects or the positive effects of sleep quality are stronger for individuals with high trait self-control.
Okay.
So what does this mean? So normally people differentiate in their ability for self-control. Some people are very good at it. So if you think about maybe famous people such as Gandhi, who are very controlled, very reserved, consider their language very well. And some people are very bad at self-control, like, for example, Donald Trump, who sees a tweet and then suddenly he has to respond.
Explodes.
Exactly, he explodes. And you really can see from his tweets how self-control failures look like. So the idea is that people differ in their ability for self-control, and this is what we call trait self-control. And these differences, obviously, so people with high trait self-control, so people who are better able to exert self-control, are protected from the adverse or from the negative effects of self-control demands. And the interesting thing our study showed is that these people with high trait self-control also benefit more from sleep quality.
What else can the individual do to assist themselves?
So another resilience factor we looked at is commitment. So it's not entirely up to the individual to be committed to her or his job, but we know that, for example, people who have a high commitment towards their employee or their work are more resilient towards these types of demands, and this has to do with the experience of flow. So the idea that people who have a high commitment at work, they experience flow much more often, and by flow I mean experiences during work which are inherently pleasant. So you work on a task, you look at your watch, and suddenly you think you just started, and suddenly you realize you spent 3 hours working on this task. And this is what individuals experience as very pleasant, because they don't notice time passing. They experience a lot of control during the task. They experience that the demands of the task fit well with their abilities. And this applies this happens much more often for people with high commitment. And therefore committed people are protected from the adverse effects of self-control demands.
And when we're thinking about that control, how do preventative things matter? Like, for instance, I'm not going to look at my social media for the next hour while I do this work, or I'm going to switch my phone off because I don't need those interruptions during this period. How do distractions or preventing distractions like that help?
Excellent question, Steve. So early research on self-controllability, on person-specific self-controllability, was thinking that basically people with high trait self-control have more resources. They have more muscle power, like metaphorically speaking, to cope with these types of demands. By now we know that this is not the case. Actually, people with high trait self-control have better strategies to prevent themselves from exerting self-controls. And these strategies are, for example, if you have some distractions, rather do something preemptively, turn out your smartphone, turn out your email client, rather than turn it on and then try to resist the distraction. Similarly, if you're on a diet and you want to refrain from eating chocolate, it's much easier not to buy the chocolate when you're in the supermarket, rather than buying it, having it in your shelf, and then trying to resist to eat it.
That's what I'm doing wrong. Okay, so the individuals themselves can do quite a lot then in terms of their commitments, their self-control, their sleep habits, avoiding distractions. All those are good examples. What about organisations or companies? How can they act to improve their staff's mental health and happiness?
Yeah. So organizations can, for example, grant individuals autonomy. So we know that job control, so having autonomy about how to do your work, about how to tackle or in which order to tackle work tasks, or when to start and finish work, can be very helpful in overcoming these demands. Another aspect which we have researched is leadership, for example. So leadership can also help to make people more resilient, especially because specific types of leadership, such as, for example, very principle-based or value-based leadership, it basically takes self-control demands away, because if you have principles, you don't need to decide on a case-to-case basis, and therefore you don't need to exert self-control in your decision-making, but rather what you do is you just follow the principle. And you don't basically ask the principal, and that's why more recent research focused on ethical or moral-based leadership styles. So we did some research on servant leadership, where the leader considers her or himself a servant of followers, employees, customers, and the organization itself. And this is a very strongly principle-based leadership, and therefore employees are servant leaders. So if you have a decision whether you sell a certain financial product to a customer, and basically you're not sure whether the customer will benefit from it or not, but on the other hand you may get a bonus from selling it, then you basically have to decide it by yourself. So you need to basically weigh out the benefits, the disadvantages. If you have a principle, you don't need to do this. You just follow the principle. And if the principle says we don't sell life insurance to customers who are above a certain age for certain reasons, then you just don't do it.
And what about environmental factors? And by that I mean things like some companies and organisations have flexi hours. Some of them have perhaps more time that you're able to have breaks without being frowned upon, or they might have, I don't know, a half day off every 2 weeks. There's certain, what I would call environmental things which help people feel more positive about work. Can those help?
Yeah, those can definitely help. I think one of the major things we're talking about is teleworking. So basically working from home some days, and I think this can, of course, it can't be implemented in every profession. It's difficult for a nurse to work from home.
Of course, yeah.
But in those professions where it can be implemented, I think it can be very helpful. For individuals, especially if people have the autonomy to decide how and when and in what way they can work. Yeah. But obviously this is a question of culture and trust. In many organizations, management doesn't trust employees to do the right thing, and that's why these measures, even though they can be implemented in on a much larger scale, are not implemented on that scale yet.
In terms of how organisations act to help their employees' happiness and well-being, is there any best practice out there? Are there any companies or organisations that you can cite as doing it pretty well and having some pretty good results?
I mean, to be fair, we have the regular suspects from the IT industry. So we're talking about the Googles and Facebooks and Microsoft. For example, they have a very nice practice where they basically allow their employees to spend, I think it's half a day or 1 day per week, I'm not entirely sure, to work on their own projects. Of course, these projects have to be beneficial for the organization to some degree, but basically they don't have any specific assignments. And this is a form of work which most probably doesn't necessitate self-control, because if you just work on a project which you inherently like, then basically this is just a pleasure to do. So this is one of the practices. On the other hand, we did we did a project, I think 4 or 5 years ago, with a German electricity supplier, where they had quite strong concerns about their workforce, mental health and well-being, and we started out with a survey where we assessed the mental health and well-being of the workforce, and what it showed us that in some of their departments burnout rates were around 50%. So quite serious, quite severe. And we introduced a leadership training as well as an individual emotion regulation training to that company, and they were quite satisfied with it, and we could show that the trainings have had some effects on employees' well-being. However, important to say is that at the same time the company also basically got rid of some of their leaders. So because in that case, and this was a very brave step from my view, they have realized that the change they want to introduce with some of their leadership stuff it's not possible.
There are some people in the workplace who feel that this concentration on mental health, this concentration on well-being and happiness, is a little bit, well, what we might call in the Western world namby-pamby. It's a bit of a Western world phenomena. You know, we're not starving, we're not deprived of money or housing, or not everyone is anyway. Not everyone who's suffering from mental ill health is, and the real world of poverty is where the real potential victims of mental health are, surely not the average person in the workplace. What would you say to that kind of anti-well-being argument?
I mean, it's an interesting view, and the question is, does it help? I mean, you can have the opinion, and the leaders I talked about, a lot of them had the opinion that basically their followers get enough money and they shouldn't complain and they should just do their job.
The kind of thing I'm on about.
The question is it helpful? If your employee is absent from work, and we know that burnout and depression account for quite a large amount of absenteeism nowadays, does it help to you as a leader to say they should basically put themselves together and arrive at work? Probably not, because people still will stay at home, so you will lose productivity. So you can have that opinion, but the question is, in today's time, is it helpful? And to be fair, there are people who basically, employees who try to benefit from this wave by claiming to have some form of mental disease while just being unmotivated or not liking their job. But from my view and from my experience in this field, it's the minority of employees. So we're not talking about a majority who is just lazy and doesn't want to work. So I think most people who claim to have some form of mental health impairment, they claim it for an actual reason. In Germany, if you get on sick leave with burnout, with depression, then we are talking about immediately 6 months of work.
Really?
So basically, if you're an employee and you're diagnosed with a form of depression in Germany, you miss work 6 months. So for your organization is 6 months lost productivity, and on top of that, once you come back, you don't come back full time, so you come back gradually, maybe starting with 20-30%. And the issue is that you can't reappoint the position because the person is ill, so you need to hold the position. You need to find somebody who covers for the person in the time he or she is not there. So we're talking about tremendous costs for organizations, and that's one of the reasons why organizations focus on this topic. So we're not saying we're just doing it for the people. We're doing it for the people, but by now organizations have realized that if they don't tackle these issues, it will create major costs.
What's so important in the workplace about well-being that translates into success? How does a happier, someone more settled in themselves, produce better profits, better output for an organization?
I mean, we talked, for example, about self-control failures, and self-control failures are basically situations where people can't control themselves anymore. And imagine you have, as a consultancy, you have an important customer who's maybe a little bit challenging, and you have an employee who bursts out and basically tells to the customer that he or she is just stupid and he or she shouldn't annoy them. I mean, this has an immediate impact on the customer relationship, and I know it quite well. So we worked also with phone service companies. I know it quite well how basically customers let out their anger at poor phone service employees, and listening to this call after call, I mean, it piles up, and then you say something wrong to the wrong customer, and then you have already an impact. The same goes for medical stuff. If you don't wash your hands, diseases spread. Again, we don't have when we do research, it's mostly on a micro level, so we don't look at gross value added as a function of health and well-being. However, we know that, for example, good mental health, or put it differently, poor mental health, is associated with less creativity, less innovation. So you have a lot of indirect indicators which show that mental health has a positive impact on performance. And therefore, I think organizations should invest in the mental capacities or mental health of their workforces.
What's your latest research in this field, Vlad?
So we did a study on the impact of commuting and self-control on work-related engagement and performance. And what we showed there is that, for example, during the commute already, individuals get depleted from standing in traffic jams, or if you use public transport, being around unfriendly or annoying fellow passengers. And that these demands during the commute translate into impaired work engagement and productivity at work. And what we have also shown is that for employees for whom basic psychological needs are satisfied, which means for employees who can be autonomous at work, who have a high competence at their work, and who feel related to their work, the impact of commuting demands on work-related productivity is not as strong as for people whose needs are not satisfied, which speaks to organizations, or which basically suggests that organizations should satisfy employees' basic psychological needs at work. And we are not talking about drastical changes. We are talking about giving people some autonomy on how to work their task, training people properly, onboarding people properly so that they become experts in their job, and also maintaining some form of good relationships among the workforce.
Yeah. Well, Vlad, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to Aston Means Business. It's been fascinating talking to you, and you've given us some great insights into how organisations and companies can keep their staff happier and healthier. Good to speak to you. This was the third in a series of 10 monthly podcasts from here at Aston Business School, where I've been interviewing some of the UK's top business academics. Our next podcast is due out on Tuesday the 18th of February, and this one's going to be with Dr. Ali Bigdeli. He's a senior lecturer and associate professor in industrial service innovation in the Advanced Services Group at Aston Business School. And with Dr. Bigdeli, I'll be exploring the future of manufacturing and introducing listeners to how servitization is helping companies to transform their offering to customers. Aston Business School. It's not just business as usual. Why? Because Aston means business. Thanks for listening.